Let's come to order and go on the record, please. I'm Charlotte Mitchell, Chair of the Utilities Commission, and with me this morning are Commissioners Brown Bland, Clodfelter, Duffley, Hughes, McKissick, and Kimmerite. In compliance with State Government Ethics Act, I remind members of the Commission of our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and inquire at this time as to whether any member of the Commission has a known conflict with respect to matters coming before us this morning.
Chair Mitchell, I have a conflict. I will be recused from item number 1, which is the application of Hobnob Solar LLC.
Okay, the record will reflect that Commissioner Kimmerite will recuse herself from public staff item number 1. And with that, we will begin.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Tommy Williamson with the Energy Division. Item 1 is an amended application for a certificate of public convenience and necessity. The public staff has reviewed the item and recommends its approval.
Move approval of the recommendation.
It's been moved and seconded that the item be approved as recommended by the public staff. Are there questions, discussion on the item? All right, hearing none, all in favor indicate with an eye. Is there anyone opposed? All right, that motion carries. All right, we will move now to item 2.
Item 2 is a new application for a certificate of public convenience and necessity. The public staff has reviewed the item and recommends its approval.
Move approval of the recommendation.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that that item be approved as recommended by the public staff. Questions, discussion on the item, on the motion. All right, hearing none, all in favor indicate with an eye. Is there anyone opposed? All right, that motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Williamson. All right, we will proceed to public staff, item 3.
Good morning, Chair Mitchell, Commissioners. I'm Jordan Nader with the Public Staff Energy Division. Item 3 is a request by Public Service Company of North Carolina for approval to adjust rates under Rider D of its tariff effective February 1st, 2023. Public staff has reviewed the application and information provided by PSNC and recommends the Commission approve the application as filed.
Move approval of the recommendation.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that the item be approved as recommended by the public staff. Questions or discussion on the motion? All right, hearing none, all in favor indicate with an eye.
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? That motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Nader. All right, we will move to public staff, item 4.
Good morning, Commission. My name is Blaise Michna with the Public Staff Energy Division. Item number 4 is a petition requesting authority for Piedmont Natural Gas Company to decrease its benchmark cost of gas from the current rate of $7 per decatherm under Rider D effective February 1st, 2022 to $4 per decatherm. The public staff has reviewed the proposed item and recommends approval as filed.
Move approval of the recommendation.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that the item be approved as recommended by the public staff. Are there questions or discussion on that motion? All right, hearing none, all in favor indicate with an eye. Is there anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Michna. All right, we'll proceed to public staff communications items.
Good morning. My name is Karen Prophet of the Public Staff Water, Sewer, and Telephone Division. Items P5 through P7 present interconnection agreement amendments filed for commission approval by AT&T North Carolina. The public staff has reviewed the filings and recommends that orders be issued approving the amendments effective on the date they were filed.
Move approval of communications items P5 through 7.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that items 5 through 7 be approved as recommended by the public staff. Are there questions or discussion on that motion? All right, hearing none, all in favor indicate with an eye. Is there anyone opposed? All right, that motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Prophet. Next up, we will hear public staff, item number 8.
Good morning, Commission. My name is Sashi Bhakta, Engineer Public Staff with Water, Sewer, and Telephone Division. Item number 8 is docket number W1300 sub 72, Old North State Water Company, LLC of North Carolina filed a notification of intention to begin operations in an area contiguous to a present service area to provide water utility service for Cadence Subdivision Phases 1 and 2 in Guilford County. Cadence Subdivision Phases 1 and 2 are contiguous to Ashcroft Park Subdivision. Old North State Water Company proposes to charge its current water service schedule of rates approved by the Commission under docket number W 1300 sub 60. The public staff recommends that the commission issue the proposed order recognizing the contiguous extension and approving the rates.
Move approval.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that the item be approved as recommended by the public staff. Questions, Commissioner McKissick?
Yeah, and this is just a question for the record. In reviewing back some of the history here, it looks like there's not been a reassessment of these rates that are charged related to the bonds for 35 years. Is there any inclination or any desire to reassess what the bonds might appropriately be or how they might be adjusted if indeed that 35 years that was referenced is an accurate indication of when they were last set and reassessed?
I know there's been some discussion, but maybe Ms. Coxton would know more about what the process is or when we intend to revise that rule. But I mean, we have discussed the amounts of the proposed bond at various contiguous extensions we get.
Sure. And it looks like we have,
Good morning.
good morning.
We are currently in the process of whenever we receive an application for which a bond would be required, we go through an analysis to determine which is appropriate. We certainly recognize that the bond amount that was set in the statute it needs to be, in our mind, indexed for inflation to a certain extent. And the way that we are handling that for our purposes is if we feel that it is warranted, we are recommending $25,000 in many instances, and that's sort of our calculation of what the 10,000 would be, moving it forward to today's dollars.
Got it. So what you're doing is readjusting it on a case-by-case basis to take into account that rates have not been reassessed in 35 years, but coming up with something that you feel is appropriate under the circumstances.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. That answers the question. At some point, perhaps statutorily, we need to go back and evaluate it, but a conversation for another day.
Ms. Coxton, if you would, just for the record, identify yourself, please, ma'am.
Sure. Rita Coxton, staff attorney with the public staff.
All right, thank you. And I see Mr. Drews is up in the back. Mr. Drews, did you want to be heard? Please approach.
Thank you, David Drews, for Illinois State Water Company. The very question Commissioner McKissick raised is actually pending before this commission in another Illinois State docket related to Camberley Phase 3, where the company proposed a $10,000 bond and the public staff proposed a $25,000 bond amount for a contiguous extension involving 10 customers. We were under the understanding the public staff is doing 25,000 across the board. That may or may not be correct, but that's what we're doing. So the question, and we filed a motion asking for a ruling on the bond amount, which has been pending before the commission for several months now. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarity and information. That's very helpful.
All right, thank you, Mr. Drews. Any other questions on the motion here? All right, we have a motion that's been seconded that the item be approved as recommended by the public staff. All in favor indicate with an aye. Is there anyone opposed? All right, that motion carries. All right, we have our minutes from the January 9th staff conference before us for approval.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that the minutes from the January 9th staff conference be approved. Any questions or discussion there? All right, all in favor indicate with an aye. Is there anyone opposed? All right, those minutes are approved. All right, next up, we will hear from representatives of Piedmont Natural Gas and Dominion Energy on company's experiences during Winter Storm Elliott. All right, good morning, gentlemen. If you would, please proceed.
Good morning, Chair Mitchell, Commissioners. For the company Piedmont Natural Gas, Brian Heslin, Deputy General Counsel. With me today at Council's table is Jim Jeffries, and we'd like to introduce or reintroduce Brian Franklin, who joined Jim Jeffries and McGuire Woods team. And I speak for everyone when we say we're very excited to have him working with us in this capacity. And then if you'd like me to proceed with the introductions for our panel. With us today are Sasha Weintraub, Senior Vice President and President of our Natural Gas Business Unit. Seated to the right of Mr. Weintraub is Brian Weisker, Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of our Natural Gas Business Unit. And then Adam Long, to his Sasha's left, is Vice President of Gas Pipeline Operations. We're here today, obviously, to discuss the events leading up to and including Winter Storm Elliott. Mr. Weintraub will start with an opening statement. We have a short presentation, but we're really here to answer any questions the commission may have about that event and about the company's performance and capabilities in that event and other events. We also have with us a supporting cast of subject matter experts in the event that our panelists can't answer the questions. If there are any questions that we can't answer in the end, we're more than happy to follow up with the commission.
All right.
So
Thank you,
that-
Mr. Heslin. Mr. Weintraub, you may go ahead and proceed.
Great.
Thank
Good
you.
morning, Commissioners. Thank you. My name is Sasha Weintraub. I am the President of the Natural Gas Business Unit of Duke Energy Corporation, which includes Piedmont Natural Gas. I'd like to start off by saying that we appreciate the opportunity to present to you today regarding our experience during Winter Storm Elliott and how it impacted our customers. Winter Storm Elliott produced the 7th highest LDC demand Piedmont has experienced in its North and South Carolina service territories. And while the storm produced cold weather and high winds, both of which increased our customers' usage of natural gas, I'm happy to report that Piedmont was able to accurately forecast this increased demand and seamlessly serve our customers without interruption and without any significant operational issues. For contextual purposes, I would point out that our current design day conditions that we prepare the Piedmont LDC system to be able to serve incorporates historical data like the weather experienced on January 21st, 1985, when Charlotte experienced an hourly low of -5 degrees, Raleigh an hourly low of -9 degrees, and Greensboro an hourly low of -8 degrees, which are significantly colder than what we experienced during Winter Storm Elliott. We provided a fact sheet for Winter Storm Elliott for the Commission, and I'll now make a brief presentation regarding the storm and our operations in just a minute. After that, we'd be happy to entertain any questions that the Commission might have for us. So we'll bring up the the first slide just reiterates some of the points. Piedmont had no significant operational or other issues during Winter Storm Elliott and did not curtail customers. Winter Storm Elliott produced, as I said, the 7th largest North Carolina, South Carolina highest daily LDC demand in Piedmont's history. Just in reference, the top 5 days were January of 2018, that roughly week of a polar vortex that occurred. So those were the top 1 through 5 days in January 18 period. Piedmont is in the process of conducting operational lessons learned and system pressure sensitivity analysis. So what we'll share with you is we always go through and how did our system perform? Were there any weak spots that we need to review? And lessons learned around any other operational issues with our assets that we need to do. So we every year we'll go through a lesson learned around what we experienced and incorporate that into our operations. And then the system pressure sensitivity analysis will share with you what we did experience was Transco's pressure did degrade from historical averages. And so we're going to do some sensitivity to understand next time there's a storm and Transco has pressure below what we've historically seen, how does that impact our operations? And I'll have a slide that directly addresses that. So the next is a map of the Piedmont service territory. You can see we spanned all the way up into the mountains to the coast. You can see Transco is roughly along the I-85 corridor, where we then bring gas off of at a variety of points. And I'd like to draw your attention to a couple assets that we have on this map that really benefited us during a storm like Winter Storm Elliott. The red triangles are our liquefied natural gas facilities. So those are 3 of our LNG facilities that are able to provide supply. We call it peaking supply. So they're really there for those cold winter days like Winter Storm Elliott. They have roughly anywhere from 5 to 10 days of 24-hour send out. So they're really there for the winter, and we spend all summer filling them up. So we use them in the winter and we fill them up in the summer is how that works. There's another triangle that you see roughly around north of Greensboro. That's the Pine Needle LNG facility. That's a jointly owned facility between a variety of parties, including Piedmont, but we also are a customer of that facility, and we also use that as well as an LNG facility. And then what you'll also see are some orange circles along from Charlotte, what we call the power corridor from Charlotte down to Wilmington. You'll see 3 circles. Those are compressor stations. So those are compressor stations that really push the gas at pressure down the corridor to a variety of customers, such as the Smith Energy Center in Richmond County and the Sutton combined cycle power plant in Wilmington. So we are taking the gas off of Transco and pushing it at pressure down to those facilities. We're also, you'll see one at the right at the Wake Johnson County line. There's an orange circle. That's a compressor station that's taking gas off the end of the Cardinal pipeline, and then we're pushing gas at pressure to the H.F. Lee combined cycle power plant just outside of Goldsboro. So these are compressor stations that are able to really boost the gas. And when you look at the power plants behind these assets, they did not have any fluctuations in pressure. So in other words, the pressure issues that were on Transco really don't affect power plants that are behind assets that can boost the pressure and maintain a very stable and constant one. There are blips, here or there, but in the duration of the event, it was a very steady pressure flow because of those assets. And then that also exists just in between Greenville and Anderson, South Carolina. That is the W.S. Lee combined cycle power plant. And there's a compressor station that does the same thing. It boosts the pressure off of Transco to provide that for the power plant. So that's a map of the system. The next page really
Mr. Weintraub, I'm gonna interrupt you while you're talking about compression. Can you help me understand, just for my own edification, what is, I understand what a compression station is, but what is the magnitude of a compression station? Are these big, huge industrial facilities, or just kind of help me understand visually and operationally what these things are like?
Perfect. Adam, I'll let Adam answer that.
Yes, Chair Mitchell. So for Piedmont Natural Gas, our compressor stations have anywhere from 3 to 5 compressor units at each station. These units range anywhere from 2,000 horsepower to 5,000 horsepower, very physically large. As compared to a Williams Transco station, a Williams Transco station has over 120,000 horsepower at that station. So compared to an interstate station, we're very small. Compared to most LDCs, we're a medium-sized compression facility.
They fit inside a warehouse, typically covered, usually with as Adam mentioned, we'll usually have 2 or 3 operation with a spare for backup is typically the setup that we have.
Correct. All of our stations have a spare unit as backup.
And the typical, I'd say the footprint is in the neighborhood of 5 acres is about the size, between 5 to 7 acres for the whole site.
Okay, and that includes real estate, land that surrounds the
Correct.
units. Okay, okay, thank you very much.
So my next slide will address winter preparedness and the modeling that helped us. So just a couple statements, then I'll explain the graph. So Piedmont's follow-up to Winter Storm Uri aided in our Winter Storm Elliott execution. Post Uri, Piedmont created a winter playbook, and we followed that playbook. We benefited from observing the impact of the Winter Storm Elliott on Midwest and Tennessee LDC operations. So we also operate on behalf of Duke Energy gas LDCs in Nashville, Tennessee, and in the greater Cincinnati area. And we saw colder weather coming at that. So we started our winter preparations days earlier in preparedness for what we knew was coming for Cincinnati, where it got to -6 degrees. And so those meetings also started to incorporate the Carolinas and some of our lessons learned from those facilities. Historically, what do we experience in really cold weather in Cincinnati? We use those learnings as well for here in the Carolinas. Our forecasted demand models accurately predicted residential demand. And I'll show you a graph that shares with you how well the models forecasted. And our system ultimately performed as designed at the end. The graph that you see there, these are 24-hour averages of weather. This is the actual weather. And you can see these are wind adjusted temperatures. So on December 22nd, you can see the average temperature was 40.7 degrees. And then on the Christmas Eve or December 23rd, that's a gas day 24-hour period. So that includes, it's 10 a.m. to 10 a.m. is the gas day. So December 23rd includes the Christmas Eve morning. You can see the average 24-hour temperature, wind adjusted, was 13.3. And again, we design our system to be able to handle a 6.7 24-hour average. So that was just the weather that actually occurred and started to warm up after roughly a day. The next slide gets into our forecasted weather and sales load. So we run a model 7 a.m. every morning to tell us what will the next gas day. So at 7 a.m., starting at 10 a.m., what do we expect? And we typically run this with a variety of weather data points. These graphs show 5 days out. How good was our models at predicting what we were going to see on gas day, December 23? So 5 days out, you can see that the weather that we received from NOAA predicted for December 23rd, gas day, that it was going to be 31 degrees Fahrenheit. That was what the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's weather models were saying that will be. And so we predicted then what would be the load given that weather. But you can see over the days, their forecasted weather kept dropping for that particular December 23rd day. So much so that you can see it kept dropping. And the models came to pretty darn, once we knew it was going to be 18, 17, 16 degrees, you can see the models were pretty much predicting what load we would expect. And so for me, some of this is the timing of when that front was going to come through. Because if you look at the graph next to it, so this is for gas day 24, and you can see for the most part, the models knew it was going to be cold. 5 days out, they said 20 degrees, 18, 19. So it really was, we knew that second day was going to be cold. And you can see our models as we incorporated these data weather sets into the model, did a pretty good job predicting what our residential load would be on that particular day. A couple points around Transco and transmission pressure and available supply. One thing we do know is Transco packed the pipeline prior to Winter Storm Elliott. So they knew that there was a storm coming, and what they do, what the term packed means is that they try to inject supply, excess supply at pressure on the pipeline, knowing that there'll be a period of heavy demand. So we saw pressures the days before the storm, we saw pressures above historical average as they were preparing for the storm, which is something that you typically see pipelines do prior to a storm. They pack the line. As the storm progressed in the second and third days, Transco's pressures lowered to below historical averages. So again, as demand was high, as there were a variety of producer issues up in the Marcellus and other places, I've read that 30% of the producers in Marcellus froze off. And so when 30% of the producers stop producing because of the conditions up there, they're no longer injecting gas into the pipeline at pressure. And that impacts Transco's pressure. And again, you kind of saw that as the event progressed. Transco's pressures, although lower than normal, did not breach any contractual pressure guarantees. So we do have a couple pressure guarantees that Transco has assets in order to make sure they can give us gas at pressure. So if you recall on that map where that power corridor line goes down to Wilmington, where Transco and that line intersect, there's a pressure guarantee of 600 and there's a pressure guarantee, sorry, that they provide and make sure they provide for us. At the end of Cardinal, there's also a pressure guarantee that they make sure they provide. And that is what we assume we'll receive from them. And again, we take that gas and, as I mentioned, can then boost it throughout the system, including to the power plants. Piedmont had adequate gas supplies during the duration of the storm. We made no Transco Zone 5 purchases during this period and did not have to curtail interruptible customers. As for our assets.
Mr. Weintraub, I'm going to interrupt you one more time.
Sure.
On the issue of gas supply, how much gas was taken out of the LNG facilities?
We started, I think we have that on the fact sheet, where we started at about in the 80% range, and we finished the storm in the low 60% range.
So you were at 80% capacity in those facilities, and you drew down to 60%.
To 60, that's correct.
So where are we now?
We're pretty,
Right around 60%.
Yeah.
Still at 60%? Can you think back to January of 2018? How much gas did you draw off those LNG facilities during those 5 days?
So in 2018, for those consecutive cold days, we would have drawn more off the LNG tanks, but we'd have to go back and just validate for the chair how much it was.
Yeah.
Okay.
We only had 2 of the 3. So Robinson LNG was not built yet. That came online a year ago. Yeah, and for this particular storm, Adam, we had them on, I'd say load, you can set how much is going to flow out of them. We had them all flowing and available, but we were on rather low and had that almost as our swing to see how things operate. But
correct. So just to be conservative, we only needed 1 plant to operate, but we started all 3 plants at a very low load, so that if any plant encountered an operational issue and had to shut down, the other plants were already online and could meet customers' demand almost immediately. So with that, they operated very low for the duration of the storm.
Okay, thank you.
So just to get back to our assets, so the compressor stations, of Piedmont's 4 compressor stations in North Carolina, only 1 relies on electric power. So the rest use natural gas as the fuel to compress. But we do have 1 that relies exclusively on electric power to drive their motors. The only North Carolina electric-driven compressor station was uninterrupted during Winter Storm Elliott. All 4 compressor stations operated as designed during Winter Storm Elliott, and all of our LNG systems operated as designed during Winter Storm Elliott. We do think that this was a holiday weekend, so it was a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, where the heavy load occurred, and natural gas demand likely would have been higher if the storm arrived midweek. You think about businesses, you think about people who were maybe traveling for the holidays. The storm did bring cold temperatures and high winds, but we had sufficient assets and a winter plan to handle the resulting demand. And again, we did not have to curtail interruptible customers. So that was our slide that we wanted to share with you some of those points, and certainly would be open to your questions for us.
All right, thank you. I have a few questions, and I'll turn it over to the commissioners for their questions as well. Let's talk some about the low pressure event or events on Transco. Understand what you've updated us today, but how, if at all, did the low pressure events that you all experienced on the 23rd or whenever they occurred impact operations of the LDC?
They did not. We were able to continuously serve all of our customers with the pressures that we observed from Transco. Now, we are going to go back and do some additional, I'll say, sensitivity analysis and modeling. What do we assume for Transco pressure? If we assume lower, and model out our system to see if we have any weak points. But with the pressures we observed, we were able to continuously serve all of our customers without any operational issues.
Okay, so can just to make sure I'm understanding exactly what happens when there's a pressure issue, a low pressure issue on Transco. You've indicated where compression is available on Piedmont system, and you've discussed the purpose of that compression. So if pressure is low, if there's a pressure degradation, I think is what you called it, on Transco, can you increase the operation of your compression to get pressures back up to get the gas out to where it needs to be on Piedmont system?
You want to say that? We can on the lines where we have compressors. So we have multiple take points up and down Transco where we serve customers. Some there is no compression, some we do, and where we do have the compression, we're able to serve, and we can put on additional units. And Adam, you can talk a little bit more about that if you like.
Yeah.
The color.
Yeah, that is correct. So where we do have compression, we can increase the pressure and push that into our system, transferring it to other parts of our system for the benefit of our customers. Our LNG facilities, specifically the new LNG facility, Robinson LNG, allows us to bump pressure in the majority of eastern North Carolina to benefit for our customers. In areas that come directly off of Transco, the way Piedmont has designed our system where there's not a compressor station, very high pressure is not required to serve our residential and commercial customers. So as Brian Weisker pointed out, in this event, even though pressures were lower than historical averages, we did not have any issues redelivering gas to those customers.
Okay, so let's I want to, again, making sure I understand sort of what could happen. I've heard you say what did happen, but for those Piedmont lines where there is no compression and there's a pressure degradation, what happens? What's the outcome of those?
So let's just probably start with, we take so you have our points off at Transco, where then we take and I'll say step it down, lower the pressure. So we have a metering and regulating station and lower that pressure into our distribution system. And it varies. Some of our systems, we step it down to 275 pounds, others 400 pounds, et cetera. And so it would, if we would have continued degradation of pressure, there would be different points where you would start to have the pressure coming into the system equal to what we would typically then distribute it out at. And as that would go on, you would end up with lower pressures further down in your system as you're serving your customers.
And that means that either you're just delivering less gas or the pressure drops to the point where you can't get any gas out on the system?
Eventually, you would get to a point where you wouldn't be able to push gas out to the end of the system, correct?
So Piedmont does have several levers, if you will, that we can use to affect delivery to our customers. At all these pressure regulating stations, as Brian Weisker mentioned, as the pressure coming into the station approaches what we would normally send out of the station, we have a manual bypass. And staff trained and in most cases prepped to go out and open that bypass to continue delivery to customers. This allows us to deliver gas to our customers even though Transco's pressure continues to fall.
So can you help me understand that? What are you bypassing at that point?
So the pressure regulation equipment needs a differential in order for it to work correctly as designed. That differential can be from anywhere to 50 to 100 pounds. So when that pressure on the inlet side lowers and we receive a notification that's lower than we would want it to be, we have staff prep, sometimes staged, to be out there to open a manual bypass and allow that pressure to bypass the equipment and go directly to our customer without going through the regulation equipment.
Got it. So you're just, you just are not stepping it down at that point.
Correct,
Okay, sorry, I
correct,
just
correct.
needed,
Yeah.
thank
We
you for
we would
walking.
also call on interruptible customers to stop taking gas as a lever that we would also pull as pressure is degrading.
And did Piedmont have to do that
We did
for
not
this
for this
storm?
event.
Okay. How often is Piedmont experiencing pressure degradations on its receipt points from Transco?
I'll take that one out.
Yeah, so normally on Transco, we have very good pressures. For our residential commercial customers where we don't have compression on our facilities, we rarely, if ever, have a low pressure signal coming from our facilities for redelivery from Transco. Where we have compressor stations, especially where there's a guarantee, the pressure is always as high as we need it to be.
And when you say where there's a guarantee, what do you mean by that?
So as Sasha Weintraub mentioned earlier, there's 2 locations where we receive gas from Transco where there's assets in place to guarantee a pressure. One is at the Iredale facility, and the other is the end of the Cardinal facility.
And are those Transco assets or Piedmont assets that guarantee that pressure?
Those are upstream assets.
Okay,
So one would be Cardinal assets, and the other would be Transco.
understood. Thank you.
So
Okay.
they provide the guarantee that we assume we will receive from them, and then that's when we start boosting it down to say Wilmington. So we have that minimum guarantee from them. Typically, they're above that.
And can you help me understand why the pressure guarantees exists in those locations, but not elsewhere on your system?
Some of them are from the power plants and their contractual obligation that they have with Transco. So I think that's probably clear that some of our contracts are between the power provider and their contract with Transco, and then Piedmont is redelivering that gas with that pressure guarantee that's typically coming from a power plant contract, power supply.
Okay, thank you.
I think you clarified that, but those guarantees are contractual between the electric utilities and Transco.
Okay, thank you. Actually, that's helpful. Okay. Can you all talk briefly about the communication that occurred between the LDC and its electric customers during this event?
Yeah, maybe we talk about the control room operations.
Yep, be fine.
Yes.
So during the event, like we do with all of our operations, our control room is in contact with both Williams Transco control room as well as the power plants behind our gates. So in the case of Winter Storm Elliott, we get a forecast of what the power plants will burn. We confirm with the power plants as they come online and start their natural gas burn and stay in communication with them in the event of any issues that come up. For power plants coming directly off of Transco, we did see lower than historical pressures coming into those plants. The plants also have visibility of those pressures, and our control room did contact each of those power plants as those pressures were realized, talk with the control room operators, and then make contact with Williams Transco to see if there was anything that could be done to increase the interstate pressure.
So many of our communications are that at that operational level around the flow of gas between all the parties involved.
And are those conversations happening primarily in real time or fairly close to real time as you're watching these pressures drop, or is there some sort of advanced notice that the people who are actually conducting the operations?
It's in real
Receive.
time.
So they will see the pressure drop and call our control room. And so it's a variety of, hey, here's what we're seeing, what's going on. And sometimes, oh, we might need to start up another compressor station to help out. We might need to call. So it's a reaction to operating conditions.
And I guess my question really is, how much advance notice, if at all, do you all receive about pressure drops? I mean, is it something that you can anticipate as as conditions exist on the interstate system?
So it's fairly reasonable for us to anticipate a lot of those pressure changes. Our control room has visibility of North and South Carolina combined on Transco, and we routinely see the same pressure swings that happen during the day, and they're fairly repeatable.
So you just said that your control room has visibility of North and South Carolina, Transco's system in North and South Carolina. Do you need more visibility than that at this point in time?
No, Chairman Shaw, I would not think so.
You don't, it wouldn't be helpful to see what's going on up the East Coast on Transco?
No, because there's compressor stations at those two limits, and what happens upstream of those compressor stations, either north of us or south of us, wouldn't give us very much insight. It's what's coming out of those compressor stations that gives us the most insight into what the interstate pipeline will be delivering.
So Transco has compressor stations every 110 miles.
110 miles.
110 miles up and down their line. They have their own 100 and something horsepower compressor stations. And so we have these offtakes all up and down North and South Carolina. So we can see the pressure that we're experiencing. And it literally could be, if you're on the other side of one of those Transco compressor stations, it's a very different temperature profile than what you see on the downstream, on the upstream side of that.
Okay, so thank you for that. That's helpful explanation. Where is the compressor station that's north of the North Carolina border?
So that's the station that feeds the South Virginia Lateral in Danville, Virginia.
Okay.
So we receive gas coming on the South Virginia lateral that goes across really the lower part of Virginia and then into, on the map, you can see it comes into 2 points of our system out towards Elizabeth City, out in Pleasant Hill and in Ahoskie, North Carolina. And that feeds the eastern part of our system there.
And so that line is indicated on the map you gave us. So what about on the main line? Transco main line, where's that compression station?
So you have the Iredell one.
So the Iredell station.
I'm sorry, north of North Carolina.
So just at that connection of the South Virginia lateral line and Transco.
So there's
in
compression
Southern Virginia,
there.
there's compression there.
And that compression would serve both the main line and the South Virginia
does,
lateral? Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Right,
Okay.
In between that and Iredell.
There's three.
There's 3 compressors in between. So in between that point in South Virginia lateral and the Iredell one, which is the main, we call Iredell, which is the connection of the line going to Wilmington and Transco.
There's two. There's one in Lexington and one just north of Greensboro.
So in between the South Virginia lateral compressor station and the one that we call Iredell, just outside of Charlotte, there's 2 others that Transco has.
2 Transco
Yeah.
compression,
Yes.
okay. So there are 2 located in North Carolina.
3 when you include Iredell.
Okay,
Sorry. So 1 in Iredell,
One in Lexington and one where the Cardinal pipeline attaches to
Got it.
Transco and Rockingham.
got it, okay. Wait, say that again, where the Cardinal pipeline attaches to?
Transco in Rockingham County.
Okay.
and one thing that's interesting with pressure is historically, Transco was, the gas would flow from south to north. And it would go up for northeast for winter demand at high pressure, 700 pounds, because they were pushing it all the way north with all these compressor stations. And what's changed over the past 5, 6, 7 years is the production find for gas in Marcellus, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, and West Virginia. So now all of a sudden you have gas coming in Transco at that end. And that really has disrupted what has been an historical flow of natural gas, again, coming from south to north. So now you have gas coming from the north, you have gas coming from the south, and there are different ways that impacts their operations, including the historical pressure that we've been able to see. And so as they have gas issues in the north, Marcellus producers freeze off, it impacts the pressure that you see. And there's only so much that their compressors can ultimately do for, depending upon the flow of natural gas. There's only so much that they can do as keeping that pressure. So again, we've seen this this variability on pressure, which is requiring us to say, do we need to do something? What type of sensitivity analysis do we need to do? Where the explanation that Brian gave around how the gas flows to our customers, how low can it go before we need to start taking some sort of change to the assumption that it's good enough for our residential commercial customers.
Okay, and so one last question, then I'll open the floor to the commissioners. The conditions on Transco, or the dynamics on Transco now to the north of North Carolina. I mean, you mentioned the Marcellus and Utica production areas, and its implications for North Carolina, which is sort of between the gas from the Gulf and the gas from the Marcellus and Utica areas. What help me understand the dynamics that are ongoing right now north of us? I mean, you said, you mentioned that you had read that 30% of production, and I think it was Utica, froze off. But what else is going on up there that's going to have such an impact that would have an impact on pressures on Transco?
Well, that's certainly one that would have an impact. So in the way that I've learned, and certainly questions for Williams Transco when you get a chance to talk to them, is the pressure in typically the production wells would produce at lower pressure, and it's the gathering system that connects all these production wells. The gathering system then boosts the gas pressure into Transco. And so that gathering system is designed to take it and move. In Marcellus, because these wells were high pressure wells, the wells themselves produce the pressure that ultimately goes into the pipeline. The gathering system does not do that. It's not designed for that. So when you have this freeze off of production wells, 30% is what I read in the PGM winter action report that's out there, that all of a sudden 30% of the wells are not providing pressure into the Transco pipeline. The gathering system that exists in the middle doesn't play that role anymore, just because of how those wells were already at a significantly high pressure when they were producing them. So that's one impact that could impact it. Another one that I think we're all waiting to see, if MVP happens to be built and come in this middle point, right at that South Virginia lateral, that will be a source of gas at pipeline pressure, and that could ultimately provide relief for pressure if that pipeline actually does come in there. You would expect it to be at pipeline pressure. We hear 800, 900 pounds. That would provide tremendous pressure relief for this middle of the system that we are with Transco. And then the other thing, just to say too, demand plays a big role. And so, especially in the Northeast, when there's cold weather throughout up and down Transco, that plays a role because demand is high, and the more that people are taking gas off the pipeline, that certainly does impact pressure flow. I mean, we've had some experiences, and Texas Storm Uri is an example where it was, minus 10 degrees in Dallas, but I think here in Charlotte, it really wasn't that cold. And so you can have temperature fluctuations across the service territory of Transco, and that, depending upon what demand is, can impact what you see on the pipeline.
So what do you know about demand north of North Carolina on Transco on the 24th?
I only know what I've read from PGM's winter report, which is out there. And what I read was they were having high load as well, but I'm sure.
I don't know that we can.
Other than what we've read, I mean, that's really what I've.
High load, but unusually high load or historically high load?
I want to say that if I'm reading PGM's report, it was one of their top. It was up there as far as load that they saw, that they experienced, but I don't think it was their highest ever.
Okay.
But I'm just going from memory.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. Questions from commissioners? Commissioner Brownbland.
Just one, and thank you for coming here and filling us in.
Yes, ma'am.
But with regard to the LNG, the capacity, you say it's down at the current time to 60%. And it's available, it will be drawn on again, am I correct, if for the remainder of the winter? And then is it correct that it will only exceed 60% or possibly get back to the 80% over the summer? Is that the expectation?
That is correct. We would continue to draw down for the remainder of this winter and fill over the summer.
All right.
If we had perfect, you'd want to draw to close to zero as much as you need to use it. And then during the summertime, when prices have been historically lower than winter, you fill it back up to 90+% and have it available for the next winter.
All right. Thank you.
Commissioner Cladfelter. Okay. Commissioner Duffley.
So you mentioned that things might have been different if this had been done midweek and there had been midweek demand versus holiday weekend demand. So I'm asking you to guess or put an estimate. Do you believe that you would have had to curtail customers if it was midweek?
No, we don't. So we, looking at, this weather that we saw and the pressures that we saw, we think we would have been able to serve all of our customers in the midweek. There'd been a higher volume. There'd have been more send out, but that we could have served all of our customers.
Okay, thank you for that. And I also want to thank you for starting up all your compressor stations. I appreciate that, even though you only had to use one. Thank you.
First, let me thank you for an excellent and insightful report, and I'd like to commend you on the actions you took during Winter Storm Elliott, because unlike Duke Energy, there were the significant curtailments that interrupted service for a lot of customers. The thing which I'm curious about knowing is that one of the things that your meteorological forecast projected were these extreme temperatures below what we received during Winter Storm Elliott. And apparently, one of the things which Duke had not done was to have meteorological projections that it anticipated the type of extreme weather event that we had with the confluence of factors that occurred, the high winds, the temperatures, the broadness of the geographic area that was being impacted. But at any point, was there any sharing of information, even though you're doing gas, they're doing electricity, they are using gas for some of the electricity being generated, to discuss what your meteorological projections were showing versus what they were observing?
Yeah, I think so. We use our Duke meteorology team to get this set of data. So we are sharing from the same source of weather. But we are just receiving this NOAA data input that we then put into our models. And what I would say is on the gas side of the business, it's not as exact as required to be able to supply. I talked about Transco being able to pack the line beforehand. So there's steps that you can do to prepare yourself. And it's not a instantaneous supply demand like you see on the electric side. We have the ability to draw from storage if we're wrong. We have storage assets up and down Transco. We have the LNG facilities that are also available that if for some reason we're wrong, the models are wrong. So it's just not as exact. And it's a little bit of a different model profile as well. We're modeling gas demand. I would say to be able to know what occurred the last similar gas day where we had similar conditions, our models were able to pull some of that and to see it. So it's a little different as far as what we're trying to predict when it comes to the modeling.
And I believe that you indicated that the worst circumstances you had experienced were back during the polar vortex. Maybe in 2018, I may have that year wrong.
That's correct, 2018.
And of course, Duke in that time frame experienced severe circumstances as well, but they had firm commitments from other companies that helped backfill I guess, the need for energy in that period. For what you are doing and how you're doing it differently, and I understand that some of the nuances, not all of the nuances, I wouldn't dare say that I do, but I'm just wondering what might be learned from what you experienced back in December, that perhaps sharing information with Duke would help them in their projections. It sounds like you're sharing information already, but just based upon the way use and demand occurs and your reserves take place, there are differences already in the systems. But is there anything improvement-wise that you could look into a crystal ball and perhaps project, even though the crystal ball might be a little bit cloudy?
Well, I'll let Brian answer a little bit around but one thing, for example, is the value of the compressor stations as one small
Right.
example where if you are pressure sensitive to what you see on Transco, one lesson learned is that when you have compressor stations as a line of defense for that pressure variation, it worked. And we saw that with power plants that were downstream on the Piedmont system behind these compressor stations, these lines of defense. And so that was one of the lessons learned, is that for certain power stations that do not have the line of defense for pressure variability, is that something that is worth looking at? And I think the answer is yes. And that is certainly a lesson learned to explain the benefits of having these compressor stations between Transco and your power plant. That's just one example. And then you want
Sure.
to talk about just the lesson learned go underway.
Yeah, so I mean, for the natural gas business, our biggest lesson learned, I mentioned before, is that sensitivity analysis that we're evaluating, going back and looking at where the points where we are more vulnerable as you evaluate lower potential pressures coming off of Transco and what that would look like for potential solutions for us. So as pressure drops, where would we need to make investment in order to ensure that we can serve all of our customers?
Got it. So the sensitivity analysis, well, those compression stations would probably, anything else? It looks like the two of you are.
I mean, we do have one of our employees that's participating with the electric side on a evaluation of what happened. And so her participation is bringing some of the lessons that we have from the gas business unit over to the Duke Energy side, the electric side.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to hearing what that input might bring. Thank you.
Follow up on a question or conversation you're having with Commissioner McKissick. So for the power generating stations that are not behind compression, you've talked about the value of compression and analyzing whether compression would assist or would improve the situation for those, would have improved the situation for those plants. But is there, I assume, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong, that there's a point in which if there's insufficient gas in the line, no matter how much compression you have, it's not going to, I mean, there's not enough gas in the line to get the gas out into the system. Is that a realistic possibility that we would ever get to that point where regardless of the compression, there's just simply not enough gas in the line?
You want to take that one, Adam? I mean, is it a realistic, the answer is there a point? Yes. I mean, if you got low enough, you would get to a point where there's just not enough gas in the line. But I don't foresee that as a realistic possibility. But that you can design your compressors for lower inlet pressures in order to help boost. But
I think what I would say too is we want to avoid that at all costs. And I'd like to give an example of in earlier mid-part December, there was an outage. A gas line that feeds Albemarle and some of the surrounding towns was hit by a third-party contractor. And that caused us to lose the town. And roughly, I'm going to say 3,200 meters, there was about 2,800 active customers that we had. And so we lost all of them. It was rather cold on those particular days in the 30s and 40s. And it took us a solid 3 days to bring everyone back online. We had to pull resources throughout the Piedmont territory, South Carolina, North Carolina, to bring them in. And to turn on 2,800 customers, it was roughly 3 days to do that. And that's why you hear things when there's a mutual aid that we have with gas companies, typically above 10,000 customer outage. You're bringing in outside resources to do this because it takes a long time to bring a gas system back up. Everything you have to do to purge air out of the system and be able to turn off every single meter and go back and turn on every single meter and check every single pilot light in people's houses. It's a significant, that outage in Albemarle was the second largest outage in Piedmont history. The only one larger was, I believe, 6,000 or 7,000 before, many years ago. So this is an event that we try everything. The whole system is designed to make sure it doesn't occur, because if we lose gas in the system, it'll take days to be able to bring everyone back online, which is something that we all want to avoid. So the system itself is trying not to do that, to say there is no more gas. That is certainly a scenario that we play out with our risk team and others, but it's something that we really want to avoid happening because of the implications for all of us.
Okay, understood, and thank you for that explanation. One last question, and then I'll see if any other commissioners has questions. But as the production ceased on the northern end of the line, did the injection of gas in the Gulf from the Gulf increase injection into the Transco line?
I don't think it increased. It doesn't. They're not, the wells themselves are just flowing. What does change is that we can call on different storage and other reserves to pull up, which I think many customers were calling on their storage for this type of an event. But that's certainly a good question for maybe Williams, just to see what do they see as the ebb and flow daily on their system that occurs.
Okay. Commissioner Hughes.
This is really just a curiosity question, probably. Did you notice or keep track of the impact something like this has on the use of gas with your customers throughout the system? In other words, do people start calling you and installing gas heating systems in a month or two after this? Is that anecdotally, or do you actually see that in your requests? And then while the event's going on, somewhat of a related topic, can you notice the use of natural gas generators throughout your system? And are those increasing? People run on Home Depot, and I know some of those are not, most of those are probably not natural gas. But I'm just curious about sort of the secondary impacts of something like this, and if
we have certainly seen a rise in electric or in home generators, and some of this is really as a result of working from COVID at home and people saying I can't deal with fluctuations in service and so forth. So we have seen since COVID an increase in electric home generators up. And it's not like 2x, but it's quite a bit, because we typically are hooking up the gas lines to those systems. So we have seen an uptick. We typically see an uptick in gas logs for heating purposes, for a backup, because that's separate from a furnace that usually requires electricity for fans and so forth. But we do typically see gas logs start picking up. What I would say, what we also know, gas logs, again, since COVID, have been in high demand, and there's quite a backlog that if you wanted it, I believe it's 6 months roughly to be able to get a slot to be able to have the equipment. So we've seen upticks. It'll be hard to say how did this event change the trajectory of what we've seen already.
It's fascinating. On a related, I know we're sort of in the nascent times of microgrids, but on your industrial customers, is that something that you are seeing more interest in? Can you tell if they were activated during this?
We can't tell. Certainly the home generators might be a version of a residential microgrid. What we do know, for example, Camp Lejeune is just awarded a microgrid of, I want to say 21 or 22 megawatts. And part of that is a 5 megawatt gas turbine that they'll be putting in and contracting with Piedmont to provide the gas. And so we see more of these larger bases and so forth being able to put up these types of microgrid systems. We certainly do see backup generators at you think about warehouse and distribution facilities and refrigeration facilities where they require ongoing supply. We certainly do provide them that fuel and hope that they enjoy the use of the fuel during events like this. And it's not, whether it's a hurricane, there's a variety of wind events, anything that could impact the power, they have a backup fuel available to them.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Commissioner Kimmerer.
Thank you for your presentation. I just have a quick clarifying question. Of the 4 compressor stations, which is the one that relies upon electric power?
It's the Clayton compressor station, and that's the one at the end of the Cardinal pipeline.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And that's dual fed, that has 2 transmission lines feeding it. So from different circuited transmission lines to provide some level of redundancy for that electric feed.
Thank you.
All right, any additional questions for Piedmont? All right, well, gentlemen, thank you very much for being here with us this morning and for answering our questions. We appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Gregg, take it away.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. Commissioners, I'm Mary Lynn Gregg with McGuire Woods, here on behalf of Public Service Company of North Carolina, doing business as Dominion Energy North Carolina. Mr. Rusty Harris is president of PSNC Energy. Along with him are Misters Andrew Moore and Darren Call, and Mr. Harris will further introduce the presenters.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Harris. Go ahead.
Good morning, Chair Mitchell and Commissioners. We appreciate the invitation to be here with you this morning to talk about our experience with the cold weather event Christmas weekend, also known as Winter Storm Elliott. We haven't seen a peak day this high since 2018, so it was certainly a test for our system. And we're happy to report that with the exception of a small number of local area outages, our system was up to the test. And we were able to serve our firm customers throughout the holiday weekend without interruption. Before the cold weather arrived and as we were working throughout the weekend, we did reach out to our customers through emails and asked them to help conserve. And we appreciate the support that our customers provided through the weekend. As with any extreme weather event, though, we have some lessons learned that we would like to share with you today. As Ms. Gregg mentioned, I have with me a few of my colleagues from PSNC. To my immediate right is Andrew Moore. Andrew is our Director of Engineering, Construction, and Transmission Operations. And also Mr. Darren Call is from our gas supply group. He works closely with Ms. Rose Jackson that y'all have heard from for a number of times, and they'll share with you some more details of the event in a few minutes. So we're going to start with an overview of our system and discuss how we use models to predict how our system will function during periods of high demand and how we prepare for cold weather events. And we'll recap for you the operational issues that we did experience on our system. Then we're going to shift to our upstream supply and talk specifically about how we forecast demand and schedule adequate supplies to serve our customers. And then finally, we'll review some pressure issues, as y'all been discussing with Piedmont that we saw in the Transco pipeline. And then we'll leave you with some takeaways from the weekend event. Just to orient you to our system and the markets that we serve, here's a map that includes our service areas in North Carolina. We serve about 637 customers in North Carolina, and that number grows by 15 to 20,000 per year. So we have a growing system. A majority of our customers, roughly 2/3, are in the Raleigh-Durham area, shaded in green. And that's important, as we'll discuss in a few minutes, some of the adjustments we made throughout the weekend to ensure that we were able to provide reliable service to those customers. We take our obligation to provide reliable service to our firm customers seriously. And in fact, it's an obligation we have under Rule R6-23. And this means that ensuring adequate supplies of natural gas are procured and delivered to our system, and that our transmission and distribution facilities deliver this gas to our customers, even on the coldest of days. So next, I'm going to turn things over to Mr. Moore and Mr. Call to discuss how we model for our peak day events, prepare our system, forecast our demand, and deploy our resources to serve our customers.
Thank you, Rusty. Good morning, Chair Mitchell and Commissioners. As Rusty mentioned, I'm going to discuss how we prepare our system for winter weather operation. Preparation for winter weather is an ongoing process that takes place throughout the year in the form of system analysis and planning, pipeline and facilities maintenance, and supply and capacity planning. We monitor and analyze our pipeline systems to identify areas of diminishing pressure using both actual system data and predictive modeling. When issues are identified, we make operating adjustments or develop system enhancement projects to bolster pressures in affected areas. Maintenance of pipelines and facilities is pretty straightforward, so I'm going to focus most of my discussion on system modeling. Predictive models are developed to simulate our actual pipeline systems. They are computer representations of pipeline systems that pair physical pipeline information, customer usage data, and weather data. We tweak and proof them against actual system pressures and flows to verify they accurately reflect how our systems operate. In turn, we use these models to predict the performance of our pipeline systems. We can experiment to see the effects of system adjustments before we implement them. Typical changes that can be tested with the model are variations in flow rates, flow patterns, pressures, and compressor performance. You can also see what the effect of taking a line section out of service, closing, opening a valve, or turning off a compressor will be by first trying it on the computer model. We anticipated Elliott would result in near peak customer demand. During such times, certain areas of the system, typically system endpoints, that perform well under normal conditions can become constrained. Modeling winter peak conditions exposes areas of low pressure susceptibility and also identifies strain on regulator station performance. The areas of low pressure susceptibility inform us of the need for focused monitoring during peak or near peak conditions. They also inform us of the need to plan and develop infrastructure enhancements to strengthen these areas. Elliott exposed a handful of low pressure areas. Some of these were expected and already have improvement projects in the works. Some were not expected. This happens because peak model accuracy declines over time and can mask newly formed weak points within the system. Peak models are developed using actual conditions experienced during the most recent peak demand event. For PSNC, the most recent peak was during the polar vortex in 2018. Winter Storm Elliott was the first exposure of PSNC's system to near peak conditions in nearly 5 years. During that 5-year period, we added hundreds of miles of pipe, and over 75,000 new customers to our system. Thus, it's not a surprise to have a few unexpected low pressures show up. And as part of our ongoing winter preparations, we will be making system adjustments and/or developing enhancement plans as needed to address these previously unidentified areas of low pressure. Now, Mr. Call will discuss the gas supply preparations.
Thanks, Andrew. Good morning, Chair Mitchell and members of the commission. My name is, as Rusty mentioned and Mr. Harris mentioned, my name is Darren Call, and I'm in our gas supply group here on behalf of PSNC. The chart we have prepared before you on the screen shows a summary of how we set up for Winter Storm Elliott and the results. We are forecasting the demand, or in forecasting the demand for this holiday weekend, it was a challenge due to the Christmas holidays occurring over a weekend, plus the colder than normal weather conditions that have already been discussed. We went from a mild yet rainy day the day before to days of considerable cold and wind starting on December 23rd. When we're looking at the chart in the first column, it represents the gas day for each holiday period. And previously mentioned, a gas day starts at 10 a.m. and concludes the following day at 10 a.m. The second column represents the average forecasting heating degree days for multiple weather forecasts. As you can see from the chart, the heating degree days, or HDDs, were on target comparing the forecasted numbers to the actual experience occurred. Our gas control group uses the average forecasted heating degree days to build the daily forecasted demand. They look at days with similar heating degree days while considering other factors such as the day of the week, holidays, cloud cover, wind, precipitation, and other factors. From there, our gas supply group then takes the demand forecast and sets out a gas supply plan to serve the load. In total, in comparing the forecasted demands in the fourth column over and the fifth column over to the actual demands, we were approximately 5% higher on our forecast than the actual load. Finally, looking at the last two columns onto the right, this represents the LNG that was planned for during this winter event and the actual output from the plant. Here you can see where during the coldest periods of the winter storm, more LNG was dispatched from the plant than planned. This increased output was primarily a result of lower than normal operating pressures received from Transco that will be discussed later in the presentation. If we turn to the next page, we'll look at the curtailments that PSNC incurred during this winter storm. As part of our planning process and preparation, interruptible customer demands are factored into the daily forecast. However, in this case, based on the demand forecast and at the time with the colder than normal anticipated weather, the decision was made to curtail a portion of PSNC's large quantity interruptible commercial and industrial sales and transportation rate schedules 150 and 180. While the slide is a little busy, it's got a lot of detail on there. We'll just touch on a couple of the key data points. The first one at the top being that the larger interruptible customers on rate schedules 150 and 180 that use 500 decatherms and above were notified on Thursday, December 22nd, that they were being curtailed at the start of gas day 23 on Friday at 10 a.m. This curtailment was based on historical experiences and weather uncertainty. As noted earlier, PSNC began to experience lower than normal operating pressures, and therefore the company decided to curtail the remaining rate 150 and 180 customers at 4 p.m. on Saturday, December 24th. As system conditions improved, PSNC began to allow certain customers to come back online in a controlled manner starting on Monday, December 26th, with all customers returning to service on December 29th. Overall, from the beginning of the planning stage to the actual experiences, the company was able to meet the firm's customer demand.
Now I'm going to discuss how PSNC's system performed during the winter storm. PSNC's system was tested during Elliott, yet it performed well and experienced no significant operating issues. A few items of note include our gas supply was adequate to meet customer demand. Our LNG plant was on standby and ready to supplement if and when needed. When dispatched, the plant performed reliably and did so for the duration of the winter event. We did experience isolated low-pressure outages in 2 locations on December 24th. We lost 21 customers in the Raleigh area because the secondary feed into the affected system was temporarily out of service due to an ongoing NCDOT relocation project. We were able to resolve the issue by placing a new regulator station in service to restore system pressure. Similarly, we lost 36 customers in Concord due to greater than expected utilization of the regulator station serving the affected area. Customer growth and previously reliable performance during moderate winter conditions had masked the regulator station's capacity limitations. The problem was easily corrected via a pressure regulator adjustment. In both cases, the outages occurred mid-morning, and in both cases, service was restored by mid-afternoon. Interestingly, we also received numerous customer outage calls that turned out not to be gas outages at all. Several were related to power outages during which furnaces and most water heaters won't work. Others were related to frozen water lines that prevented customers' water heaters from working. Switching gears, I'm going to talk to you about the conditions we experienced on the upstream Transco system. Here we have a map showing PSNC's upstream supply pipelines, receipt points, and the PSNC transmission system. Essentially, all of our gas comes from Transco, which is depicted by the green line. The orange line is the Cardinal pipeline, and each of the yellow dots represent a PSNC receipt point. The dark blue dots represent compressor stations. PSNC's East region accounts for 65% of the customer base, nearly 420,000 customers. And in recent years, 75% of its new customer growth. It is served from 2 points on the Transco system. The first is Transco's Dan River takeoff. That's the uppermost yellow dot there. And it supplies roughly 2/3 of the gas. And the Cardinal pipeline is the other supply, which supplies the remaining 1/3. My discussion regarding Transco is going to focus primarily on our experience at Dan River. This graph depicts Transco Dan River delivery pressures during the winter storm from 12 a.m. on December 23rd to 12 a.m. on December 27th. The blue line represents Transco's pressure, and the orange line represents the pressure we would expect to see based on past experience. That is approximately 675 psi. And the blue shaded areas show the rise and fall of ambient temperature. Transco proactively packed its system in preparation for the storm. Coming into December 23rd, pressure was well above 700 psi. Ambient temperature peaked around 47 degrees that morning and dropped precipitously over the next 24 hours to a low of about 9 degrees. Correspondingly, the Transco pressure held strong until about 6 p.m. on the 23rd, after which it declined for nearly 2 days, reaching a low pressure of approximately 460 psi before it started to recover. So what's the significance of this? I'll show you on the next slide. The significance is the effect that Transco's abnormally low pressure had on PSNC's ability to bring gas into its system. This graph covers the same time period as the previous graph and depicts the flow through Dan River takeoff into PSNC's system. The purple line shows the actual flow, and the green line is just for reference to show the sustained flow that can be produced, has been produced through Dan River when Transco pressure is normal. You follow the purple line from left to right, you see a sudden spike in flow, and this occurred around 6 p.m. on December 23rd. If you remember from the previous graph, this is about the same time Transco's pressure started to fall. The spike in flow occurred when PSNC started operating its compressors, boost pressure, in the PSNC transmission system. Shortly after, you see the purple line starts to fall. It's normal to see flow drop off overnight when most people are asleep and businesses are closed. However, you can see that flow continued to fall during the morning hours of both December 24th and December 25th. That was not normal. Demand was peaking during those times. So what was going on? Well, our compressors are optimized for inlet pressures around 600 PSI and above. As Transco's pressure continued to fall, we weren't able to operate all of our compressors because doing so pulled compressor station inlet pressures down to the point that some of the compressors started shutting down. The inlet pressure was too low for them to operate. And without full compressor utilization, PSNC was unable to bring its full volume of planned supply into the system through downriver where it was needed. I'll now hand it back to Mr. Call to discuss the related supply side impacts.
As mentioned in the previous presentation, there were some, of course, production issues up in the Northeast. And as part of that, PSNC, while we had access and deliverability of sufficient supplies from various supply agreements and sources, we did receive a force majeure notice from one of its suppliers that was experiencing weather-related gas production issues from certain facilities located in the Pennsylvania region. The total impacted volume over the holiday weekend was approximately a total of 20,000 decatherms, which represented over that holiday weekend less than 1% of total supply. Even with this disruption, we were able to utilize other available storage resources to replace the force majeure quantities, avoiding any spot replacement purchases and avoiding any purchases in Transco Zone 5. As noted earlier, with the normal pressures, we had to call upon more of the Cary LNG facility to compensate for the gas supply that could not be scheduled into the system. Even with these events coupled together, we were able to successfully meet the demands of the firm customers with these supply agreements.
Just one clarifying question, if I may interrupt. The rate 150 and 180 customers that were interrupted, were all, and you may have already said this, but were all of those customers located in the east?
It was system-wide. So,
okay.
So I'm going to summarize some of our takeaways from the experience we had Christmas weekend. First, as you heard Andrew explain, we did do and do on an ongoing basis extensive planning for Winter Storm Elliott and other cold weather events. We accurately forecasted the load based on the weather, and we slightly higher than the actual demand, but accurate, very accurate the first couple of days, and then slightly higher the last 2 days. We met our firm customer demands despite the challenges of the winter event. And so we had a plan, and the plan was based upon the weather and the demand we had forecast, which was accurate. We did have to make adjustments on Christmas Eve due to the lower pressures that we saw on Transco. And we made those adjustments through the curtailments of our interruptible customers and the ramping up of our LNG facility. And that's what allowed us to be able to maintain firm service to all of our customers throughout the weekend. But the takeaway for us is that you would like to forecast a pressure on Transco, and then that'd be the pressure that you see when the event occurs. And in this case, based on historical performance of Transco, we forecasted over 600 pounds of pressure, and what actually materialized was 460. So our plan is to meet with Transco. They're coming to see us next month because we want to understand more about what happened on their system. Why was the pressure 460 instead of 600? What are the mitigating strategies that we need to put in place in order to try to assure that going forward, we have an accurate forecast that we can build our plan around. There are some longer term things that, I don't want to represent exactly why Transco's pressure got to 460. That's what we'll let them explain to us when they come see us. Because it is a combination of everything happening on the whole Transco system, I'm sure is a factor when it comes to what we saw. But there are some things that we know that would make a difference. One would be, should new interstate supply be brought into this area, specifically the MVP pipeline project, there's no question in our minds that that would make a big difference. That would provide a large quantity of natural gas into Zone 5 of Transco, and would, I think, make a big difference in an event like this. And then secondly, on-system LNG proved itself valuable for us through this event, and additional on-system LNG, I think, that we can control and is connected directly to our system is something that would be very valuable. We have 1 BCF of LNG on our system today. We have a total of about, and correct me, Darren, but about 15 BCF of storage altogether. But the other 14, we rely on Transco to deliver to us. So it's very useful storage, but in an event when Transco is having lower pressures, it would be better to have storage longer term on our own system. So those are a couple of longer term solutions that we think would improve our ability, give us greater confidence in cold weather events. And that concludes our presentation, Chair Mitchell.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Harris, and thank you both for this presentation. This is helpful to our understanding. The few follow-ups for me, and then I'll open it up. Did you is the 460 on Transco, is that the lowest the company has ever, that the LDC has ever experienced?
Do you know, Andrew, or Darren, have we seen lower than 460 in your recollection?
Not in my recollection. I don't recall.
Okay. Can you talk some about getting gas into South Carolina?
Did we?
Let me just let you talk about South Carolina some.
Okay, for our system in
Yes.
South Carolina. In South Carolina, the situation is a little bit different. We rely about 50% on Transco and I've got a gas supply expert up here, so help make sure I don't mess this up. But about 50% of our gas comes from Transco that provides service to our system in South Carolina. About 50% comes from another pipeline called Southern Natural. And so we have more diversity of supply, at least in terms of interstate pipelines for South Carolina. We did not experience, to my knowledge, any upstream issues on that system. Having said that, we regularly, more frequently in South Carolina, have upstream curtailments of our supply in South Carolina. So we are more frequently interrupting our interruptible customers in South Carolina than we do in North Carolina. But for this event, it's kind of unusual on our system today for us to have to do a widespread curtailment of interruptible customers. That's not so unusual in South Carolina for us. But for this event, it was more impactful to us that Transco had lower pressures because 100% of our gas comes off of that pipeline.
Why do you have to interrupt more frequently in South Carolina?
It's a combination of the fact that we have another pipeline in between us and Transco and Southern Natural called CGT. And so between CGT and the upstream supply of that, it's just more common for us to have curtailment of our, we can't take above our firm capacity. So that results in more interruptible curtailments in South Carolina.
All right. And you indicated that you're in discussion with Transco, something in the future. What have you learned so far? What explanation have they provided?
Well, we've heard a few other challenges they have. Most notably, you heard Mr. Weintraub reference that in the Northeast there were some more significant curtailments of supply. So a pretty significant amount of supply did not show up onto their system. That's been the main reason that we've heard just in some brief conversations with them. But, we want to know more, and our supply, except for the 1% curtailment, did show up. So we want to understand how that affects us when supplies from other sources that are not necessarily providing supplies to us can affect our ability to nominate and take all of our gas off of their pipeline.
Last question for you. Was the LDC able to redeliver all gas to power generating stations that the LDC serves?
We did. We serve 3 power plants, and we did not curtail or reduce any of the service to those power plants.
Okay. All right, let me see. Commissioner Brown Bland, questions? Okay. Commissioner Gladfelter. Commissioner Duffley.
Just one question. You were talking about the pressure, and was there a breach of any contractual guarantee or pressure guarantee?
It was not. And therein lies one of the areas to explore with Transco. It's not new. They've not had a pressure guarantee, at their delivery points to our system in the past. But as you heard from Andrew earlier, in the past, we've seen pressures over 600 pounds during these cold weather events. But we do not have a pressure guarantee from them at Dan River. And I think it was, our concern was more related to Dan River than, let's say, our other takeoff points, because as you heard Andrew explain, 2/3 of our customers are in the Raleigh-Durham area, and 2/3 of the gas that goes to those customers comes off of Transco at Dan River. So it just was a point that where we felt we needed to take action to assure that we were able to maintain, good supplies. When we were, and I will just add, when it came to our decision-making on Christmas Eve, it's really easy to decide to ramp up our LNG plant. You can do that quickly. But when it comes to curtailment of interruptible customers, we provide them some notice. So we were talking to Transco on Christmas Eve and watching, as you saw from Andrew's chart, their pressures continue to drop. And given that we didn't have a strong sense of exactly how low that pressure may go, that's why we decided we need to go ahead and curtail our interruptible customers. Fortunately, it did level out at 460 and start rebounding after that. But in those, I'd say, early afternoon hours of Christmas Eve, when you would expect to see, at least we expected to see their pressures rebound, they were continuing to go down. And that's what really caused our taking the actions that we took with our LNG plant and interruptible customers.
Okay, thank you for that. And then one follow-up, as I understood, what I heard was that because of the inlet flow, some of the compressors or a compressor station was not able to properly work. Is there a modification to have that compressor station work at a lower inlet flow? I mean, is that one of the
There
things?
probably are some adjustments that we can make in order to enable operation at a lower inlet pressure. We'll definitely be taking all of the data from the storm and analyzing that to see what kind of adjustments we need to make to our system to accommodate for a similar occurrence in the future.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for the presentation.
Just to add
today.
on to that, it is something that I think, Andrew, you would agree, it would require some work to do that. It's not, we can't turn a knob, but it's definitely an option to explore.
Thank you.
All right, any additional questions for PSNC? All right, well, with that, gentlemen, thank you very much for being here this morning and for answering the questions.
Thank you.
Appreciate the time. All right, we have come to the end of the agenda for this morning's staff conference. Let me check in to see if there's any additional business for the commission. All right, hearing none, we'll be adjourned. Thank you very much. Let's go off the record, please.